You're listening to Puma Podcast.
Hi, I'm Franco Luna, Puma Podcast. You're listening to Teka Teka News. In this episode,
So unang-una po, kailangan po natin maintindihan na ang IQ po is affected or formed by a play of multiple factors. Unang-una po dyan, syempre yung nutrition ng bata habang lumalaki. Syempre kapag ka ikaw ay malnourished, marami rin pong mga kakulangan at nagkakaroon ng apekto yan doon sa ating brain development.
the World Population Review found that Filipinos have a below-average IQ. So bakit ang baba ng IQ natin?
So kapag ang isang bata po ay lumaki sa isang bahay na wala pong masyadong educational attainment ang kanilang pamilya, nagkakaroon po rin ng mga ganitong epekto yan sa quotient ng bata.
The voice you heard earlier was Department of Health Officer in Charge, Maria Rosario Vergere. She says malnutrition is one of the causes of this dip in IQ. So ano nga ba ang below-average IQ? The WPR found that our average IQ here at home was around 81.64 in 2023. That number ranks us 111th among the 199 countries included in the study. The average IQ is 100, and according to studies, most people have an average IQ between 85 and 115. Just to put that number into perspective, we know that intelligence quotient is a measure of a person's cognitive abilities. Cognitive, meaning thinking, reasoning, remembering, imagining, learning words, and using language. Ibig sabihin, marunong mag-isip, mga tuwiran, makasaulo, mag-imagine, mag-aral ng salita, at gumamit ng wika. Now, the World Population Review is an independent organization without any known political affiliations. It's based in Walnut, California in the United States, according to its official website. Anong lagay ng mga mag-aaral na Pilipino? Here's Vice President and Education Secretary Sara Duterte.
The 2018 study results of the Program for International Students Assessment, or PISA, are distressing, as it is alarming. The study results showed 81% of participating Filipino learners could not deal with basic math problems. 81% had trouble understanding texts of moderate length. And 78% could not recognize correct explanations for scientific phenomena or draw valid conclusions from given data.
Duterte presented the Department of Education's Basic Education Report for 2023 early this year.
Over 28 million learners all over the Philippines. Filipino learners are not academically proficient. Oftentimes, Filipino learners experience emotional abuse and exhaustion. Some Filipino learners suffer from psychological fatigue. And being academically insecure, many of them fail to meet the standards of the demanding and competitive world.
Halimbawa, ayon sa mga pag-aaral, ang batang may IQ na 70 madalas hirap sa pag-intindi at pagkumpleto ng mga gawain sa isang traditional na classroom.
The lack of school infrastructure and resources to support the ideal teaching process is the most pressing issue pounding the Philippine basic education. The ongoing review of the K-12 curriculum has revealed that the curriculum content is congested, that some prerequisites of identified learning competencies are missing or misplaced, that a significant number of learning competencies cater to higher cognitive demands.
The Vice President also described the education crisis in terms of kulang ng classrooms, umaapaw na curriculum, at nakaka-move up ng grade level kahit di pa kabisado ang iiwan ng grade level. So yes, we are in an education crisis. But look, the Basic Education Report came out in January of this year. Sa totoo lang ang tagal na rin nating alam na meron ng krisis sa sektor ng edukasyon. There's the lack of funding, overcrowded classrooms, inadequate teacher training, and lack of access to quality education in rural areas. 9 out of 10 Filipino children aged 10 and below have trouble reading and writing simple text ayon sa World Bank report na lumabas nung kasagsagan ng COVID noong November 2021. But this story is not about those things. It's that the crisis is getting to a point where we're one of the worst in the world, and these things follow our learners well into adulthood, leaving them easily manipulated, disappointed, and out of work.
Now, I do want to point out a couple of things that are actually positive about the Philippine education system. Because we're always like, oh, it's a learning crisis. And that's true. But there are important good things about us. Number one is access. Access in the Philippines is actually good. We're at around 90% access to education. At least you have people getting into or having the option to get into a school. So we're lucky in that.
Yan si Eos Trinidad, isang Pinoy na doctoral researcher sa University of Chicago. He talks about this in Usapang Econ's episode called Majoha, Senyales ba ng Learning Crisis? Anong lagay ng mga mag-aaral na Pilipino compared to other countries in the region? Of the 11 Southeast Asian countries, the Philippines ranks among the lower half for IQ in the region. Malaysia, Brunei, Laos, and Indonesia join us there. Among the upper half, Singapore is first place, followed by Cambodia and Myanmar. Globally, Japan has the highest recorded IQ by country in 2023 at 106.5. Taiwan and Singapore ranked second and third with scores of 106.4 and 105.8.
We always say that we have a comparative advantage because of our English language and the medium of instruction, but that's slowly getting out from us because of just the performance in general in terms of these international tests. But that's us in comparison to other places, and that has its own downsides and that has its own demerits as well. But at least it should alert us to something.
Now, the report indicates two things. Unang-una, full swing pa rin talaga ang learning crisis natin dito. But even more worrisome, mukhang ang pag-aaral sa eskwela ay hindi nagtatranslate sa pagkatuto. And researchers have a term for that, learning losses.
There are instances na hindi makakonsentrate yung mga estudyante. Ang usapin lang dati is kung gaano siya yung equity dimensions ng learning losses na mas marami nagsusuffer ng learning losses kapag nag-drop out ka.
That's Jason Alinsunurin, isang associate professor of economics sa De La Salle University, Manila. He was also in that episode of Usapang Econ. He says learning losses have far-reaching consequences even past a child's education.
Pero ngayon, dahil sa pandemic, all over the place siya. It's very pronounced and there are evidences which can be triangulated from the perspectives of teachers, perspectives ng eskwelahan, perspectives mismo ng estudyante. And it's quite true na talagang it would have severe and deleterious consequences sa kakayanan ng mga ating mga estudyante in the next few years.
It's an established fact that other factors such as education, environment, poverty, and opportunities also play a role in a child's IQ. Just think about how material taught in traditional classrooms is often designed for children with average to above average IQs. So children with lower IQs might struggle to keep up and fall behind. And yes, the pandemic and its effects have a lot to do with it too. It's had a significant impact on the learning crisis both inside and outside of the classroom. We're pausing for a quick break now. When we return, how does the Department of Education plan to address these new findings? At the sidelines of their Language and Inclusion Summit, DepEd spokesperson Michael Poa told reporters, quote, "We will read the report, and if there's anything else that we need to do in terms of intervention, definitely it will be discussed," end quote. But the issue needs more urgency than that because
Kapag hindi properly trained or skilled ang ating mga kapwa mamamayan para dito, marami sa kanila, they would find themselves in jobs or in occupations which do not necessarily pay well or pay a living wage, so to speak.
think about how our graduates are entering a workforce where they now have to compete with artificial intelligence. Are they ready for that? I talked about this in another episode entitled, Mawawalan ba ng trabaho ang mga nasa BPO dahil sa AI? All this is nothing we don't already know, but the point is, this World Population Review report is one of the first times we've been compared to our foreign counterparts, and it's how we stack up, or don't stack up, against them that has experts alarmed.
Yung East Asian Economic Miracle, na yung mga bansa sa East Asia tulad ng Taiwan, ng Japan, Korea, Singapore, isa sa mga dahilan kung bakit mabilis ang kanilang paglago ng ekonomiya ay substantial na investments na ginawa nila sa kanilang human capital. At kasama dito ang edukasyon.
By the way, those countries mentioned were all in the top 10 countries in terms of IQ that participated in the study.
So, maraming nagsasabi na ang investment sa edukasyon sa mga bansang ito ay responsible kung paano marami siyang tinatawag na externalities or mga spillover sa industriya, sa entrepreneurship, sa maraming aspeto ng pamumuhay sa kanilang mga ekonomiya. So, kung titingnan natin siya sa level ng mga manggagawa, sa level ng mga citizens, sa mga mamamayan, ang mga bata na mas nakakatamo ng mas mataas na mga scores, basically sinasabi sa literature na higher test scores are moderately correlated with future earnings and income.
If we're thinking about the learning crisis in terms of economic inequality, researchers say there's also an inward-looking way to think about this learning crisis. Here's Ios Trinidad again.
How dispersed are the learning outcomes of the students within the Philippines? So one of the things that I thought was really interesting when I was studying the PISA was that within the country, there are certain students and there are certain schools that perform almost similar as Singapore or as similar as people in Shanghai. And these individuals are really performing very, very well. But then there are people, and a greater majority, who are performing very, very poorly. And so that larger disparities within the country is also part of the learning crisis. So the learning crisis is not just us, our education system, in comparison to other countries. It's also within our country, the wide disparities across people studying in different schools and with different opportunities to learn.
That's the thing. At its core, the problem is caused by poverty, but eventually leads to poverty in the end too. It's a vicious cycle that affects all of us. The question we've long been asking is, what are we doing about it? The DepEd has since promised to look into more possible interventions in the wake of the report. Education Secretary Sara Duterte also made much loftier promises to reform our education system way back in January.
We will take steps to accelerate the delivery of basic education facilities and services. We have recently created the School Infrastructure and Facilities Strand. This strand will be devoted entirely to addressing long-standing issues on educational facilities and infrastructure. We will build more resilient schools and classrooms. For 2023, we have the budget to build around 6,000 classrooms. We commit to closing the remaining gaps in school infrastructure with policies to eliminate corruption and insulate the allocation of school building funds with politicization.
They're looking at school-based feeding programs and learning camps too. Yet the World Population Review suggests that the Philippine education system is still not doing enough to help students reach their full potential. Obviously, changing systemic issues doesn't happen overnight. But experts say addressing conditions outside of our education system helps learners thrive too. But maybe what this also means is that it might be time to rethink the ways we connect with our students outside of their schooling. And more than anything, perhaps we're running out of time to address this crisis. Here's President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. at the Basic Education Report 2023.
I think that if there is one thing that we took from the comments is that the Filipino is better than this. The children are better than this. And we cannot fail them. And that is the main motivation that we should keep in our hearts. We have failed them. We have to admit that. We have failed our children. and let us not keep failing them anymore. And thus, it once again reminds us that education is the most valuable service that the government can give to its citizens. If there is nothing else, after preservation of life and limb, education comes next.
And that was today's episode of Teka Teka News. Again, I'm Franco Luna. This episode was edited by Carl Sayat. Listen to Teka Teka News and Puma Podcast on your favorite podcast app or for free on YouTube. And listen to Usapang Econ's episode on the education crisis entitled Madyoha, Senyales ba ng Learning Crisis? We've also added a link to that episode in the description of this podcast. Thanks for listening.